Hi, I'm Vaughn Lauer, and I want to say good morning or good afternoon or good evening, depending upon where you are in the country. Today we have attendees from all over the world, and I think that's pretty remarkable. And just give you a little introduction of myself. I've been in special education for a lot of time, and in that time I've been a teacher, I've been a building administrator, district office, and state administrator for special education. I've had a good career, and it's still going on. And the folks that you're going to listen to today have encouraged me to continue learning and helping. So I'm delighted to have them here. One thing I do want to mention, I've written a book entitled When the School Says No, How to Get the Yes. It's a book on collaboration, and it shows anybody who will read it how to work with schools or how to work with any team, as a matter of fact, and lead collaboration without a lot of fancy terms or fancy skills. And it does work. So, having said that, I want to introduce two people today, two that I have met. One is a local, relatively local, and that's Melissa Sadin. And she lives in the great state of New Jersey. And she has been a special education teacher and administrator, grades 2 through 12. And she's with us today, is a consultant that works in the field of what we're talking about today, and for example, is on the board of directors of Concerned Persons for Adoption. She's an active member of the Attachment Trauma Network, and she's a contributing author to the Attachment Trauma Network blog as well. She's also published articles, and not a surprise, on the topics of attachment trauma in public schools. Welcome to you, Melissa.
Thank you, Vaughn. Very happy to be here.
Well, I'm happy to have you here too. And by the way, I met Melissa in a conference in New Jersey and was very fortunate. So I'm recommending go to conferences. Some great people are out there. Speaking of another great person, Jane Evans comes to us from the UK. And I guess I better mention she might disappear on us through the camera and return. We're having some technical difficulties, but let's hope that it lasts through the presentation. I met Jane too, but I had to go all the way to Ireland to meet her, which was fortunate for me because with that I could introduce her to Melissa and some other folks here in the States, and we're delighted to have Jane here when she's here, and I think she just disappeared. So now I can tell you everything about Jane that I couldn't say in front of her. Jane is an expert in childhood trauma and has been featured in newscasts and articles and books and radios on topics of children and trauma and violence in the family. She's has some books, and I'm hoping she'll return to us to be able to talk about those books, but there we go. Welcome back, Jane. And I was saying nice things about you while you were gone.
He was.
In addition to all of the other things that Jane does, including workshops all over the countries, I should say. She's a contributor to websites and magazines as well. So welcome to you, Jane.
Thank you so much, Vaughn.
Apparently we have a little delay, and that's okay. Last time we had a webinar, we talked about conceptually what childhood trauma is, or attachment trauma, and we talked about how the brain operates and why some of these behaviors occur. Today, we're going to take another step forward and address two issues and focus our attention to schools. We want to talk about what the environments of the schools, what demands are there from schools that are upon children from the various levels. And I want that because our attendees are maybe elementary, maybe preschool, or maybe high school, but not all of these. So we want to talk to all levels. The second thing we want to talk about is some examples of what kind of behaviors we might expect at the various levels, because indeed they are different. I think with those kinds of examples, we'll be in a better position to say, so that's what the brain looks like when it's not functioning the way we would anticipate it to function at this level and this level. So with that in mind, I'd like to start with the first one, and that's taking a look at the various environments. I'm going to take the college level just because I was there. Yeah, most recently. Kindergarten, I'm not sure I remember much of. But at the college level, the environmental demands are more for independence. Students need to be responsible for getting to class on time, getting their own schedule together. I mean, things that most of us know. There's independence in terms of living. Nobody's there to walk them through, to hold hands, to support them like they did in schools. So the demands are much more stringent. Even the classrooms are different. They can be on video, the internet, they can be in groups of from anywhere to a handful with an instructor to a classroom with 300 students. I hated those, but they exist, and so the person has to adjust to those. The problems that we're most likely to see at the college level are those of a social nature as well. The interacting with others. Issues might surface because it's there, of drugs and alcohol, and how to deal with that, how to deal with peers who are all at your academic level, and have similar backgrounds and have various backgrounds as well. So that kind of structure is different from all of the others, and they're all different from each other, and the demands are different. And so the kinds of behaviors we might see from somebody who has experienced childhood trauma is going to be different. So I've just given an overview of both of these. What does it look like, and what are the demands? And really the things that I'm talking about in terms of interactions are the adult nature, politeness, social responsibilities that are different than they are at other levels, and where there might be problems in interacting with peer group. So having said that, I thought we might start with the preschool, and I'll open to both you ladies, whoever feels like talking first. Give us an overview of what the demands are of a preschool, and because it is different, and I've not been there in a while. So, and then the kind of, yeah, I know you're laughing. I dyed this gray just for today's conference, so I looked like I knew what I was talking about. But if you could, tell us what the demands are, and then some examples of behaviors, and then whoever doesn't speak, if you join in and say, yeah, another couple of examples might be like this. I think that would be so helpful to our audience to take what we've had before, what we have now, and eventually, with the series we're hoping to continue, we'll be able to give you far more examples of things that you can do to intervene to help students who are experiencing childhood trauma. All right, ladies, somebody want to talk about preschool?
Yeah, early years expert, so I will pass the pre-K kindergarten portion to her.
Unfortunately, early years can be the greatest opportunity for traumatized children. It can be the place where the really, really important work can begin. That, that if people connect with the parents and the carers there, and they start doing very socially, emotionally based work with the children, this is all children, but particularly traumatized children, then that better than anything prepares the canvas for school. But what we have in the UK is a massive focus by the government on school readiness, and they don't understand what that means. So for them, school readiness means that children have to be able to have a level of numeracy, literacy, language development, all those things that are completely missing the mark, particularly for traumatized children, because what we know is that they are always, they have global delay in all areas of their development. So, whereas early years could be the perfect time to address this, to begin to teach them. Interestingly as well, what the early years people are telling me, or the professionals are telling me, is that they are increasingly seeing children coming into their settings with much more complex needs in much higher numbers than they've ever seen before.
So the problems you're presenting in terms of readiness are exacerbated by the numbers of children in need.
Yeah,
it really highlights why you're doing what you're doing. Melissa, did you want to add?
To note, Jane, I agree with you. Something that I call neuroplasticity is really important to keep in mind. When I do presentations, I always start with, it's not a happy topic per se. Trauma is not a happy word. But the reason that we are all here today and doing what we do is because there is so much hope. So the issue really is that teachers and schools and relationships with parents and schools can do so much to help these children. As Jane mentioned, their development is delayed dramatically by exposure to trauma, and so much can be done by involving the schools. And it is different at every grade level. In kindergarten, pre-K, there is a big focus on, more of a focus on social emotional learning. Particularly in the United States. Jane, we have a program called Head Start that came out of the federal government, similar push for school readiness. And when I speak to preschool and kindergarten teachers, they are very willing to accept their responsibility in social emotional development, which is relationship forming and building and helping children develop relationships and form relationships with the teacher and with their peers. And that can be very healing to children with trauma because they have issues with attachment development. That's a subset of what happens to their brain when they are traumatized. As you move forward in the grades, however, there is less of a focus on social emotional development and more of a focus on independent abilities to learn as you go through the grades. The problem that children who are exposed to trauma or have attachment disruption is that somewhere around third grade, for many children, every child is different, there's a leap where teachers expect a developmental ability with executive function, organizing their thoughts, organizing their ideas around a task, in addition to organizing where their backpack is, how to unpack when they come into the classroom. And children who have been exposed to trauma or attachment disruption their brains, their executive function is generally not there with neurotypical peers in third grade. And that's when you really start to see a gap because they are not moving toward independence. You might not have seen so much of an issue academically, preschool, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and then all of a sudden in third grade, you see it again. And then there's a big leap because in third grade, it's a shift from learning to read, which is what they were doing pre-K to 2, and reading to learn. Third grade teachers spend a lot of time helping children read nonfiction and make meaning out of it. But processing speed, which is the part of the brain required for reading, is also interrupted by attachment disruption and the trauma associated with prolonged exposure to maltreatment. And so these children start to show difficulties where maybe their difficulties prior to fourth grade were more with peers or with behavior, acting out, or seeming hyperactive, unable to concentrate. By third grade, you start to notice their learning falls off too. My concern is that for teachers who are not trauma informed, that looks like a child who may have ADHD who develops gaps over time. If you have true ADHD and you are not focused, you miss huge parts of lectures and because you're not tuned in, you're not able to tune in. So by third or fourth grade, those little gaps become large man-eating potholes. And so children of trauma and with attachment disruptions look like those children. My concern is what they need, though, is a return to the focus on social emotional learning that seems to fall away all the way through. It gets less and less of a focus. By high school, teachers are not attending to social emotional learning at all in their classrooms. It is not their role. There's a school counselor for that. Children who have trouble with their relationships, either with the teacher or with their peers, interrupt the flow of the lesson that was planned, so they're removed.
And Melissa, you've run through the grades really, really fast. I would like to go back to, and come back to where you are, but I'd like to go back to the preschool group. And I understand, and I think we're in agreement, they're coming to school unprepared, without the knowledge that other children have. Would you say that's the same?
Their brains are not developed the same way other children are.
Right, and so going back to that preschool program, how would a teacher recognize that, because we have special education programs in both countries, how would they recognize that this child might be impacted by trauma? Are there other cues in maybe the behaviors of social interaction, or the way the child acts with the teacher, to go, hey, wait a minute, I'm not sure this is just a learning disability, it might be something else. I was wondering if we could give those kinds of examples that would help us in addition to learning, because I think we recognize it's going to impact learning, but I need a little bit more. And it's not necessarily, and Jane will say this, that we're going to treat them differently. It's just, oh, okay, I need to be really, really conscious of how I interact. So if you could give some of those examples, both you and Jane, I think that would be helpful.
Is Jane with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, why don't you start with what preschool teachers, how would they recognize a child who's been exposed to trauma or attachment disruption?
I mean, also, Jane, if you could give an example of, well, a teacher might try this and a child responds this way, to go, okay, that would help.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most noticeable thing, which teachers very often pick up on, but then perceive to be potentially ADHD or on the autistic spectrum, are things like just not, there's a great expectation that very young children should stay on task. Now, number one, their brains are not supposed to stay on task. Very young brains are designed to be connecting super fast, growing. Alison Gopnik talks about children being in research and development mode. So very young children are supposed to move, to touch, to poke, to pull, to roll, all those things. And we try and stifle that in them at our cost. But what you will see in particularly some, not all, but some traumatized children, is that they will just be that child that whizzes around the room, that can't, they might try and put one brick on top of another and it doesn't work immediately, and they're gone to the next thing, and they maybe crash in the middle of other activities that other children are doing. Somebody tries to get them to maybe pick up a pencil and they just fall off their chair, or they're so overwhelmed so quickly by everything. And whilst they like the one-to-one of the closeness of somebody coming to help them with the pencil, they quite quickly feel pressurized, and because their brains are so sensitive to pressure and stress and shame and guilt, that then makes them even more wired. So the whole thing of trying to get them to settle, forcing them to sit down for story time or circle time, they're the children who they literally, they either sit so still that it's worrying, they literally don't move, or they find something self-medicating to do, so something repetitive like pushing a car backwards and forwards, or rolling a ball, or something that soothes their traumatized lower brain. Or they have so much adrenaline and cortisol, the stress reaction and action chemicals coursing through their little bodies, that they have to go. And so therefore, in one way or another, there's one way that they obviously stand out, and so they're the children that when assessments are done, they're marked down as not accessing their learning.
Mm-hmm.
So, the best thing to do is not to just focus on the individual child. It's a whole class approach, because the things that will help your traumatized child will help every child, because there's so many of our children are experiencing low levels of trauma that they sit on. And a lot of the families I work with, they tell me, even though their children have long histories of trauma, they say in school they behave. So in school, these poor little children are pushing down all this stress and anxiety and urge to move and finding it hard to concentrate, but it's at massive cost. So the things that need to be integrated in every classroom from tiny up to the minute they leave school are much more mindful based practices, yoga, breathing, anything that concentrates on soothing and calming that lower primitive brain, which is where all this activity is coming from, needs to be integrated throughout the day, every day, in every classroom in the world, never mind, in our two countries.
I think it's important to note, Jane, you said it before, what's good for children with attachment disruption or exposure to trauma is really very good for neurotypically developing children as well. We're talking a lot about strategies that help children regulate their emotions, and all children benefit from sensory, cognitive, behavioral approaches to learning to regulate their emotions. It's very good for all kids.
I want to point out that your examples were very typical of identifying children with both attention deficit disorder and autism, and I thought that was very interesting.
That's what we're increasingly seeing. I read an article recently that said in the UK, even though it's against all guidelines, more preschool children than ever are being medicated for ADHD, which they don't have. It's just now everyone has become an ADHD expert. And, children are being diagnosed, in inverted commas, almost out of the womb. And it's a complete false trail. If everybody understood on some level about trauma and attachment, we would not be medicating these poor children and just putting off the inevitable.
Again, I want to interrupt and remind our listeners that you can pose questions. And one person did, Jane, that I think might be very appropriate now. Because this person is saying, well, in order to determine or help at least determine whether it's autism or ADHD or something else, is to get a good social history. That brings in a couple of things to me that it's actually a question. How do you do it without asking the kind of questions where you might be, you're darn nosy about things I'm not going to tell you about. So how would you, if that's okay, it's a little just from what we were talking about, how would you get that information?
Well, I think the very, very best thing to do, which I know some schools do, and I get that it's massively resource-laden, is they home visit. If you want to go know about a child, go to their home. Go to their home, for goodness sakes. If you go see what's going on, then you will get a sense. Even if people are telling you something different, you will just know what's going on. So someone in that child's life needs to, go and to build a relationship with their parent or carer of trust. But I think then maybe you have a questionnaire. But again, it's resource laden because somebody needs to sit with the parents and do the questionnaire, not just give it to them. And a social history would change lives beyond anything we can imagine. I think it's terrible for our teachers and our education staff that children come to them without their social history. You are setting up our very dedicated educators to fail, because how on earth can you understand a child if you don't know their social history and the context?
I also want to add, maybe not so much in the preschools unless they are preschools that are in the public schools, but certainly in kindergarten and then all the rest of the way through. In the States, we have something called response to intervention. Some people know it as intervention and referral services, RTI. But basically every school should have some form of a group who listens to teachers' concerns about children, and they together try to solve the problem and include the parent. So I wanted to piggyback on what Jane was saying. If the child is gotten to a level in your concern for them where you might be seeking assistance from a team, the ACE's study that was done by Robert Anda and Vincent Folletti and group, they have a survey that is available to download online. So if you have an opportunity to meet with a parent one-on-one, you can ask the questions on the survey. But I want to remind everybody, helping children in your classroom who may have attachment disruption or exposure to trauma doesn't require, as Vaughn said, sticking your nose into other people's business. If you have a relationship with a parent where you can get a social history, or the social worker, school psychologist, some other member of your education team can get that for you, that's the best case scenario, I agree. But I want to say to the teachers out there who are feeling very uncomfortable with asking questions like, how often do you beat your child? There are other things you can do. If you go through what your tried and true methods for helping a child, as Jane said, who's whizzing around the room, not focusing on building any blocks, maybe interrupting other children, having difficulty moving through the preschool appropriate activities, try all of the wonderful things that you know that you have done in the past with children who are having trouble settling down and cooperating with an activity, with peers, with directions. If that doesn't work, then you probably are dealing with a child with attachment trauma or trauma. That's my advice. If everything you already know doesn't work, then you need to consider trauma-sensitive approaches, because they are sometimes counterintuitive to all of the other things that you have already been taught and have worked for many other kids. If what you know doesn't work, it's likely you can assume that the child has some form or had some form of trauma in their lives. The reason I say this with great conviction is because using trauma-informed approaches in any grade level is good for all kids. So even if you don't have a confirmed knowledge that the child is having trauma at home or has had attachment disruption, I keep using that term. By that I mean they are adopted, they're in foster care, one of their parents is in Afghanistan, one of their parents is incarcerated, the attachment, normal attachment to a parent is disrupted. That's what I mean by that term. I keep using it. But even if you can't verify that, you're not going to hurt anybody by assuming they have trauma and then trying some of the trauma-informed approaches.
I think that's a good point. One of our other listeners pointed out that even the person carrying out the interview needs to be aware of trauma, what those hallmarks are, and I think that's an excellent point. Listening to us last time and this time and the next time isn't going to make us an expert, but at least we can say, okay, I know I need to have more information. But that was an excellent point. Questions are great. Please keep them coming in. I'm watching the time now, I'd like to move on to elementary school and talk about what the demands are there as well. We've already addressed readiness in our country, like the UK. I don't mean to make a political statement here, but we are test happy. And we're getting information that says the child is not doing well, and staff and schools are under pressure to do well. But we've got these little guys who need something else. So how does elementary look different than it does preschool? What are the demands? And again, what kind of behaviors can we see in addition to the academics that will say, you know, this is different? I may have to take it to the team you were talking about, Melissa, or your school may come up with an entirely different team as a resource to say, well, we're here to help you. I mean, all kinds of options. Okay, I'm doing too much talking. Back to what does elementary look like, and what do these guys look like in the social world, and how do I pick them out?
You know, let's start with children who come, parents who come with the diagnosis in their hand. Be very careful when a parent tells you that their child has been diagnosed with anxiety disorder, attachment disorder, ADHD, oppositional defiance. So these are, children who have had struggles for a time and now have a diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that you should do at every grade level is ask what's happened to this child, not what's wrong with this child. If you ask what's happened, well, they have ADHD. Okay, what's happened to them? Tell me a little bit. This goes back to Jane's mention of social history. About, what they have experienced. And if the parent is, nothing, we have a loving home. It's also possible you can have attachment disruption and still have a very loving home. Then what you start to see in these kids is hyperactivity, what we call externalizing behaviors. But I want to remind you, those students you have who respond in an atypical fashion to a typical scenario are the kids we're talking about. Perfect example, I observed it the other day in a classroom. The teacher was telling the class about a boy down the hall who'd fallen off the playground equipment. And the kids were all worried about him, so she was telling the class, that he was going to be okay so they could move on with their afternoon. And they were all going to write cards. So as you can imagine, the children were appropriately concerned for their classmate down the hall and wanting to know what they could do to help. There was a little boy in the group who laughed out loud when all the other little kids were shaking their heads in a "that's a sad thing" kind of a way. This child laughed. So later when I spoke to the teacher, I said, that's a child of trauma. It's an atypical response. Rather than punish that child and say, you should know better, we don't laugh when someone gets hurt, you might want to sit down with that child and ask them how they're feeling about the child. And probably consider that they are a child of trauma. So at every grade level, if you have students who are not responding emotionally in a way that you would expect at your grade level, so if you're teaching 4th grade, you have a standard understanding of children who are 9, 10, and how they respond to happy news and to sad news, to a friend who's mean to them. If you start to notice a child who's not responding in a way that you consider typical, take another look at that child and ask what's happened to that child. So you can see children who refuse to comply. Let's all start the writing assignment, and they just don't start. So it's freeze, fight, or flight. And if you start to see freezing, which is avoiding homework or not doing an assignment, and it's repeated. Mondays are very difficult. Fridays are very difficult. Homework is a big red light. And I caution all teachers, if you have children struggling with homework, stop and take a look. Meet with the parent, meet with the team, meet with your colleagues, and look at what's happened to that child and find out why homework is such a problem. Because that's a symptom that the home is not conducive, or that they're having learning trouble so that they haven't mastered the topic well enough to go home and work independently on it. But it might just look like they're telling you they hate homework and are not doing it, as opposed to what they really feel, which is, I don't have any idea how to do this at home, or I don't have anyone at home who can help me, or I'm not safe at home, so I can't focus on homework.
I like that. That was helpful to me. Jane, I know you and I talked the other day about things like this, and you had an approach, and I can't remember what the behavior was, but you had an approach to getting at what Melissa was talking about. If you don't remember it, it's okay. I don't mean to put you on the spot, though I just did. Maybe you could talk about what you also see at the elementary school and the behaviors that we might be out looking for to help us. Maybe this isn't what we thought it was.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly what Melissa says. It's anything that you see a child doing that doesn't really serve them well, to be honest. You know, we very quickly, all of us as grown-ups, slip into disrespectful ways of talking about and labeling children, particularly when they're making our lives a misery. Yeah. Because, you know, I have not been a teacher. I have worked in schools, but I've never been a teacher. But the amount of pressure on that one person to meet the attachment needs of maybe 30 children, 5 of whom may be very traumatized, and it's kind of on a sliding scale, is ridiculous. But it's maintaining that level of curiosity. So it's, and Bruce Perry talks about how we are all relational and emotional beings. We have to learn to be logical. So our whole system, everything in our nature is about getting on with others, particularly whoever's in charge, because they're our survival docking station. So when we see children who are doing things that consistently get them into trouble, consistently the spotlight falls upon them, whatever the behavior is. I mean, we could sit here talking all day long about the different things that children do, because they're so amazing. They are very creative, bless their little hearts, in trying to get somebody to meet their attachment needs. And the more traumatized they are and the worse things have been, the more creative they will be in drawing attachment to them. It's not attention. Everybody labels children, they're very attention seeking. They just keep doing that. They just want attention, like that's a bad thing. But if you take the word attention out and you put the word attachment in, yes, they do want attachment. They crave it. Every child does. The more they get when they're little, the less they need it when they're older. But they always need it. But the children we're talking about, they have not ever been able to internalize that sense of someone emotionally will be there for me, someone will keep me safe, someone can contain my feelings. They haven't had that. So they are constantly like a little boat upon a massive ocean, and they're just trying to get to the shore. But I'm going off onto my analogies again, but they don't have a paddle. They maybe have a sieve, so they use the sieve. Well, it's not getting them very far, but they keep on trying because they're desperate to get to the shore, and the shore is the teacher. The more teachers can be supported in being curious and knowing that the thing these children crave is a relationship, but they only have really messy, complex ways of asking for it. That's what it, whether that's in a 3-year-old or an 18-year-old, that's what it's all about. And this pushing children to independence is utterly ridiculous. Again, Bruce Perry, who I'm a massive fan of, you can probably tell, he talks about how we are meant to be in small groups. We're meant to be in tribes. We have not evolved to the point where we are happy and relaxed and we can function really well on our own. That's against nature. So in schools, increasingly as children go on, we isolate them, we take them away from their peers, we put them under pressure, we make them sit tests, so we ramp up the pressure again. We do all the things which nature tells us won't help a child, whereas if they can work together in smaller groups and they don't have to solve problems on their own, hunter-gatherers do not solve problems on their own. They work together. Yeah. In workspaces, we have teams because teams do better, and we know that. But in school, we go, oh no, you can't do the thing that will be most helpful to you. So all children suffer, but again, as Melissa says, traumatized children, everything is times a million for them. So it's much more painful, it's much more difficult.
I want to go back to something, Vaughn, because I can hear the teachers that I've worked with and that I've most recently done professional development for. And if they haven't already asked you in the question format, I think that one of the things they're out there saying is, but you're describing so many kids who don't have trauma, who do these behaviors. And I want to reiterate that kids of trauma, kids with attachment disruption, do the same things that other children who don't have something they need do. I keep going back to the way that you know that they are children of trauma is that they don't respond to your efforts in a way that you're used to children responding. And by that I mean sticker charts. My favorite metaphor is to call children of trauma lions, because they are as different from other children as ducks are to lions. So you know you have a lion when all of your duck treatments don't work, or they backfire, or things get worse. So, and again I say, if in fact you label a child for treatment purposes as a lion, and you go through some of the things we recommend for children of trauma, and then find out that that child is a duck and never had any trauma, you've probably helped the duck anyway. So to teachers who say, but you're describing all children do these things. First of all, autistic children do these things, but they do them for different reasons, and to a different extent, to a different severity, and to a different frequency. Lions have a higher frequency of behavior. And again, as Jane said, I love that you mentioned attention getting. They do look like they are asking for attention. They tap their pens, they interrupt speakers, you, the teacher, or other speakers incessantly. But in fact, what they are trying to do is attach, and they don't have any idea how to do it. So they are going to do it to a greater frequency than another child. Just an important point. There are teachers sitting there going, well, you're describing all kids, what makes these kids different? And my answer is always treatment. Treatment is different.
Fascinating. I think what's helped me, maybe not others, but helped me is replacing the word attachment with, replacing the word attention with attachment. Because attention seeking has never really meant much to me. It's like, what are the behaviors? But when you add attachment to it, it's like, oh, okay, it makes more sense to me. We have another question that, these are very good questions today. The person is saying, I'm with you on attachment, my words, not hers, but I'm with you on the attachment, but come the end of the year, I'm not with that child anymore. Part of that is, how attached do I get? And now I'm asking, what do you do when the child leaves you and moves to another teacher? I'm curious to what you both think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, and again, what we know from science is that, you know, for a child to have a positive attachment relationship with somebody is better than not having it. So if you only have that child for an academic year and you build a relationship with them, you have given them an experience of what that feels and looks like, which they may never have had in their lives. So that could be the greatest gift, that they will remember that, oh, you know, Miss Jones, I mattered to her. I mattered to her. You know, Mr. Clegg, he always noticed me. I must matter. I can't be all those things that I thought I was, because he always used to say great things to me. He used to notice when I was trying my best. He used to, a child, you know, that's like water in the desert to many of the children nowadays, many. So never underestimate it. That can completely change a child's life. Maybe not at that point, but later on they remember that one person. I know lots and lots, sadly, of traumatized adults and young people who have been through the care system, so being in foster care, been adopted, and many of them have gone on to have to use alcohol or drugs or all sorts of things to self-medicate, particularly when they get into the kind of teenage bit. And some of them have been involved in crime, but so many of them then, you know, like 2 or 3 years later, they turn everything around. And I always say when I meet them face to face is, who was it? Who was that person in your life? And sometimes they know and sometimes they don't know. But there will have been this amazing attachment figure that believed in that child, and I see it again and again, that they come around later So for all the teachers, I would say nothing that you do is wasted. And, you know, when the children go on, maybe give them, I don't know, a little key fob with a photo of you in, or something that they have a connection still to you, or that they're allowed to maybe just see you now and again in the school would be really, really helpful.
That's what I was going to mention to Jane. First of all, I remind you of what I said in the beginning, which is there's great hope. And hope lies in teachers who see these kids for more hours a day in many cases than their own parents do. And any attachment you can form, any relationship you can have with a child begins to heal the impaired parts of the brain that were caused by the trauma. So 1 year of an attachment with a teacher helps feed that neuroplasticity I talked about. So you can be a part of a great deal of healing even if that child moves on the following year. One of the strategies that I have found very effective, I like the picture, Jane, that's a great idea, but also reconnecting, showing the child that you haven't gone away. If your school can create a program for this, even better, but if not, on your own, find that child next year, particularly in elementary school where you might not have to go very far down the hall. Have lunch with them once or twice. Help the teacher they have now understand the importance of a relationship with that child. That can go a long way. I've known lots of Lions who moved on to the next year and maybe just didn't have that connection with that teacher, but knowing that the teacher they had a connection with last year still cares goes, as Jane said, it can make such a difference.
I'm getting what I think are fascinating questions, and I love them. I'm watching the time, and we're down to about the last 9 minutes, so I want to get to the secondary level because this is a more difficult level, and my wife works at a high school, and we talk about this often, thanks to both of you ladies now. But when you enter puberty, we're talking about social interactions that apparently go awry. We're talking about high school kids that will use the F word just freely. The how part is what we're going to get into and answers one of the questions. This is great stuff, but how do I do this? And we're asking people to stay with us because that information is coming too. But how do you deal with kids who are now socially inept at reading signs or at the position in time where they're bigger than you are, and they don't have a hesitancy of telling you off? We still know that the academic problems might be there, but to me it's a different world, and our policies are set up that, and they're going to see more of these at the secondary level, that those kind of behaviors aren't acceptable. It might be easier to deal with in an elementary school, and I'm sort of getting into the what do you do, but maybe it doesn't matter anymore. If that shows up, we're going to do something. So blah, blah, blah. It's the best I can give you as a question.
Having worked in a high school with, my first teaching job was as the teacher of a 9th through 12th grade self-contained classroom for children with challenging behaviors, who now I look back, room full of lions. I wish I knew then what I know now. Mm-hmm. But even in 9th grade lit or 10th grade French, what I say to teachers at the secondary level is, it's never too late. You have to stay calm. That is the most important piece. If you have a child in your classroom and you are under, and I say this with a great deal of respect, a tremendous pressure to get through your content and produce results. And in New Jersey, that's now directly tied to your own evaluation. I promise you that focusing on a relationship with a child who's got the hoodie over his head, and when you try to rise his head is full of profane language, sitting down next to them, maybe after the class leaves or maybe before, and saying, what's happened to you? How can I help you? What part of my class? It's not personal. They hate your class. Okay. joking, or keep it light, despite the fact that they might say things to you that are designed to hurt your feelings. Because if they haven't had many attachment opportunities all the way until they've gotten to you, they've figured out that it's easier to be left alone than to try to care. So they're very good at getting people to leave them alone, even leave them alone while they're suspended for their lovely behavior that pushed you so far away. Mm-hmm. So to high school teachers, I say, stay calm. Rather than remove them from your room, try to form a relationship with them and ask them or yourself, what's happened to this child? How can I help? As opposed to, what's wrong with you? Because they don't know what's wrong with them. I still don't know what's wrong with me. That's a question for the ages. But high school kids can be very aggressive and very personal in their attacks, in their attachment-seeking behavior.
Jane?
I've just spent the last nearly year and a half working with teenagers who were being violent and abusive towards their parents, and not surprisingly, they were also nearly all of them had great difficulties in school. So they were permanently being excluded. One of the boys, he was back in school, I think, an hour after the school holidays, and he was permanently excluded for about 5 days, and he'd been in the door an hour. And, I would go in all the time advocating for these young people, saying, it's not working, exclusion will not work. And actually, the reason it won't work is because they really want to be in your school. So even though you send them away, at the minute they're allowed to come back, they'll come back because they're seeking attachment with you. This is the only place they feel relatively safe, not that safe, because schools are generally very unpredictable, loud, busy places, especially at senior level. But it's a testament to you in this school that they come back. And they come every day. Despite all the worst things that are going on at home, they still come back to you. That's how much they want a relationship with you. So for me, it's about supporting our educators, giving them very good emotions-based supervision so they can unload all the trauma they have to absorb every day. We can't, I agree with Melissa. I always say to every adult, it starts with you, and you have to be the calm one, and you have to, first of all, you have to be calm, and then you have to emotionally connect with this child in an authentic, compassionate way. And then sometime later, you might be able to talk about, you will be able to talk about the correction, about, where do we go from here, because I know this is making life really hard for you, and we know that, swearing at a teacher, it's not okay. The thing is, the things they're doing wrong, they know about. They know that's wrong. They don't know how not to do it. So going on and on and on about, you can't do this and you mustn't do that, you've broken the... Yeah, they know that. That's the bit they know. So leave that to one side and concentrate on the bit they don't know, which is how to be in a relationship, how to be calm, and how to function in the real world. And if we could get that into schools, but we have to really support the educators, because they're not getting the support they need in order to do this, or the training, or the understanding, and we're asking them to do a massive thing every day to absorb all this trauma.
Okay, clearly we haven't answered all the questions. And I pick up a couple of things here, and then I want to ask you each to summarize. But it sounds like schools need to be making changes. I think we all agree to that. We as individuals need to be making changes in how we observe and how we respond, and we need to be supported in doing so. It's not going to happen as well if we do it by ourselves, and the whole school does not become a part of that, or the policies of. And I know, Melissa, you could talk about policies because you're changing them in your own district, which I think is remarkable, to be supportive of children with trauma. We're running out of time, so I'm going to ask Melissa two things. What are you up to that you can talk about that's legal, and how might somebody reach you or learn more about what you're doing?
I am working with teachers right now and one principal to help them understand and recognize trauma, and then to help them understand what to do about it. I have to say that my summarizing message to teachers is, if you look at these children and see them as frightened, that will really help you stay calm. Even the high school children who are cursing at you and maybe shoving something toward you like a paper, think of them as desperately consumed by fear. They are afraid now to have a relationship with you. So they want to be suspended because that's not as threatening to them. So that will just help you. The other thing is, we need to help administrators, superintendents, down to principals, to directors, to understand how to support these teachers, as Jane said, because there's something called vicarious trauma. And working with a lot of children of trauma in your classroom impacts you, and you need to be cared for. And that really should come from a systemic change to support you so you can support these kids. And that's what I've been busy doing, helping teachers and hopefully then helping principals, because teachers can't do it alone, and they begin to get very tired if they're the only teacher at their grade level, or if their whole grade level is the only grade level in a school that's willing to understand these children and be trauma informed.
Melissa, I'm sorry. We're going to get cut off if we're not careful, and I appreciate that, and I feel like I'm being rude, but how might people reach you, or you have a website or something?
Traumasensitive.com.
Say it again. I'm sorry.
Melissa Sadin at gmail.com.
All right. I was running my mouth. Could you say that again, please?
Traumasensitive.com and melissa.sadin at gmail.com.
Okay. And if we have more time, I know Melissa is doing a lot more things than I gave her time to speak about. I want to thank you, Melissa, and let folks know we'll be back, and tell your friends. Jane, could you tell us what you're up to and how we can learn more about what you're doing?
Yeah, I continue to put on my own conferences around trauma, resilience, and recovery for professionals. I'm rolling out training for professionals on how to support parenting impacted by trauma. I'm regularly delivering training to early years professionals on what trauma looks like in early years children and how to support it. I have my new book coming out next month, which I'm very excited about, which is for young children who've grown up with emotionally unavailable parents or carers. It's called Kit, Kitten, and the Topsy-Turvy Feelings. And yeah, continuing to just take all opportunities I can to write and speak about trauma and get people on board and, feeling that they can do something about it.
And again, you have a website that people can stop in and look at?
Yeah, sure. There's if you look on the blogs, particularly on my website, www.parentingposttrauma.co.uk. I'm also very active on Twitter at JaneParenting2.
Easy to find. And
yeah.
For those who are interested, again, I'm Vaughn Lauer, and I want to thank everybody for being here. We will be back. I'm glad you all signed up. If you have any questions you would like us to hit on or topics, please let us know. We'll be sending out information to you so that you can listen to this, because it is being recorded, listen and watch, as a matter of fact. And if you're interested in better IEPs and working with school staff and parents, check out my website at www.iephelp, as easy as can be.com. Having said that, I want to thank you all, and we will be back with more information of the how-tos and what we're up to. Thank you again. Take care, folks.